you're going a little bit of the extra mile.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the young people today, and even our age and maybe some older, the teaching of comprehension is to actually absorb it and learn.
One of their sites, and I believe it's in Florida, their most producing site, it was like 19.7 million annually, and they're closed on Sunday.
And the biggest thing that let's call it the win-win for everybody in that scenario is the pivotability.
If you're investing into an early stage startup company, when you write that check, don't expect a check back.
Yeah.
That's the best expectations that you can have is don't expect anything back.
Yeah. Last year, when I left my last boardship that I was at, which was in the Web3 space, investing in that space, I said, what am I going to do now, and how am I going to make an impact in this AI space?
Welcome to the Chris Salerno Show, your go-to for real estate, business, health, and family insight. I'm Chris Salerno, CEO of QC Capital. Each episode, we explore the latest trends and expert advice from industry leaders. Whether you're an investor, entrepreneur, or seeking balance, this show provides an inspiration you need. Join us and elevate your game on the Chris Salerno Show. Welcome to the Chris Salerno Show. I am your host, Chris Salerno. Excited to have you back on another episode. I have a new friend, Brian. I've known you, is it about a year or 8 months?
Close to, yeah.
Because I've known Eric, I think, over a year.
Yeah.
Time flies. Holy cow, man.
It's crazy.
I love it.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. No, excited to have you. You were actually traveling through.
Yes.
So I was able to snag you and say, hey, let's get on. So excited to have you and have listeners hear about your background, how diverse it is, and who you are and what you're doing. You know, a little to touch on with Brian. You are 25 years of capital market experience, over 3 billion investments transacted. I'm excited to dive really deep into your background and your story. So let's rewind it, though, to childhood days.
Yeah.
I hear that New Yorker accent, so it's going to resonate with a lot of people. Let's talk about childhood. Where were you born? Walk us through all that.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, first, thank you for having me. And,
most definitely.
It's great to be back in Charlotte. I haven't been here in about 20 years.
Wow.
And as we had dinner last night, we were just kind of reminiscing about how Charlotte's evolved, right?
My God, yeah.
But getting to your point, born and raised New Yorker, pushing 50. So I spent about 46 years of my life in New York.
Oh, wow.
And, New York is...
It's New York.
It's the Mecca, right? Everyone wants to kind of be in New York. So, very grateful to have grown up in that area. Mm-hmm. I'm a son of a fireman.
Okay, love that.
Very modest. Didn't come from, call it a ton of means, but I think that's where I've been brought to today. Mm-hmm. 3 siblings, 3 brothers. It's interesting because I always talk about it. I wasn't really a planned pregnancy, if you will call that.
Yeah.
The gap between me and my brother about 13 years.
Okay.
And then I have an older brother. The oldest brother is about 17 years.
Wow, so you're the youngest.
Yeah, I'm the youngest, which I'm also very grateful because it allowed me to really grow up a lot quicker.
Oh, most definitely.
Than, you would...
with closer siblings because they're so far apart. He was 17 years old when you were born.
Yeah, exactly. So my brother was kind of like, "What the hell are you doing, Mom? What happened? Type of thing. You know what I mean?" So it was quite interesting. But it almost felt like sometimes you were like an only child. But just very grateful for having the mentorship and the ability to grow up a lot quicker than I think my peers because they always had siblings and
that were closer in age.
Yeah, closer in age, the whole nine. And so, growing up in New York, transplanted to Long Island, if you're familiar with Long Island, it's where all the, my family's from Brooklyn originally.
Okay.
So I have that kind of hardcore, Brooklyn.
That Brooklyn.
Yeah, the Brooklyn, where are you from? I'm from Brooklyn. How you doing? Type of thing.
Yep,
But grew up in Long Island, and, the family, environment was good, but I started working at a very early age. Yeah, much like
that's New York. I mean, that's that New York atmosphere. Is one thing I will say too. What I love about New York is families feel tighter. Yeah, like it's the old culture. You know, is if you're from New York, it's like family's everything. Totally. Where down south, I feel like they don't have that type of bond like they do up north.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Come from I'm an Irishman, if you call it, background. So There was a lot of cousins. My grandfather was one of 13.
Holy cow.
So I have this massive family. I probably haven't met a lot of my cousins and type of thing. So you got to be careful on days like St. Patty's Day when you're out there back in the day. You know,
I bet.
You probably run into a cousin here and there type of things. But, family and the core values of family are really important to me. We were talking about last night, like, circle of friends and family, like, what exactly would you do, for who do you consider a friend or family? So, one of the things that, I think was very impactful with me being raised actually by a single mother as well, because my father and then my mother and father split. Not to get too personal, but that was also like a perseverance.
What age was that?
That was I think about 6.
6.
So it's interesting. My dad retired, and it's cool. Like when you're younger, you think, my dad's a fireman. It's fantastic, right? It's like every little kid's dream, which was cool. But we had a really close relationship. I saw him quite often.
Oh, good.
But with my brothers going off to college and kind of living their lives and figuring out what they were trying to do, really taught me to be very independent early age and understanding how to kind of, in a way, be the man of the house, right?
Most definitely. And statistics show like there needs to be a man in the house.
Totally.
Even if there's a single mother, and hats off to those wonderful single mothers out there, there still needs to be a man in the house. And especially if you're raising a young man, you have to have a man in the house, because it's the DNA that we have as men. We're a lot harder on our sons, things like that. So I think it's super important. So, at that early age, your brothers are going off to college. You had to step up to be the man of the house.
Totally.
What was that father figure like? Were you still relying on your brothers at that time to be that? Or
you hit it spot on. So what happened was I always joked around, as I got into college, they're like, wow, you have a pretty unique background. Being that you're the youngest and there's such a gap, I always would tell people that I have 4 fathers, because my mother would be like, I'm telling your brothers, or you can't do that, you can't do this type of thing. And, it's interesting because it was a really good dynamic, but I was able to pull from each one of those, family members' backgrounds.
Yeah, their experiences and things like that.
Yeah, to understand kind of, I think when you're young, you want to figure out what direction you're going to go in life. And I was very fortunate to have that. I started working 10, 12 years old.
Really?
The other thing that was
What was your first job?
First job was, I can't remember if it was like delivering newspapers or we were talking about that last night a little bit, with, riding the bike and getting chased by dogs and stuff like that. But I also was doing, landscaping, and then, I kind of...
All that hard labor type of work.
Yeah, totally. So,
which they pay you under the table. My first job, I was 12 years old, and I was a dish boy, and they paid me $20 a night. That's it. Cash.
Exactly. So cash, I don't want to say cash is king, but it is, when you're that age. And it gave me a little bit of advantage, because I think, a lot of my peers, not to say that everything was handed to them, but, I think it's important to have work ethic.
100%.
Very young.
Yeah.
And then, understanding, how... watching my brothers to matriculate into their own, careers and also their families, right? Which is quite interesting. So I was an uncle. I was an uncle when I was 9 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I have a 40-year-old niece.
Holy cow.
And these nieces and nephews are now having children.
Oh, you have a big family tree.
Yeah, it's really cool. And in fact, I just spent a week with the entire family on my way down here for like a little mini family reunion.
Yeah.
We actually try to coincide a bigger family reunion.
Do you?
With the Olympics.
Oh,
we
no
call
way.
it the Keane Olympics.
I love that. And you guys do all different type of games, things like that.
Yeah, games, food nights and, stuff like that. But it's good because, I'm now, and I forgot to mention this earlier, I'm now transplanted to the financial district in Miami.
Yeah.
Which is, and again, I'm sure we'll get into this.
We will.
Is kind of the new capital market.
It is.
Versus New York. But, yeah, anyway, so.
No, that's exciting. I think you hit it spot on. It's super important to understand that work ethic at a very young age.
Totally.
I started when I was 12. I'm instilling that in my son, who's 4.5.
Sure.
And I've seen it firsthand with siblings that did not have that type of work ethic or drive that I had, and I see where they're currently at in life. Yeah. It's totally different.
Exactly.
When you call them up and they have their day off and all they want to do is be lazy. And I'm like, what? I don't even know what the hell a day off is, because I enjoy what I do. I work 7 days a week, 24 hours.
Super important.
I love what I do. So I don't even think about a day off. That doesn't register in my mind.
Yeah.
So when someone says a day off, I'm just relaxing, I'm thinking, I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know how to cope with that.
Totally.
Because ever since 12, I've never had one, and nor do I care. I don't want one, you know? Totally. And we're all wired differently, and that's why I'm a firm believer is that you can't go out there and give, I mean, even if you did this, and we saw this during COVID, give $1,000 to everyone. Everyone's going to spend it differently. They're going to use it differently. Yeah. You can't help that because they're all wired differently mentally, you know? And I think that work ethic and that drive, you can't, I mean, you have to start at a young age. Absolutely. If you don't start at a young age, it's going to be so hard to break that in your 20s, and you're going to be mediocre at the end of the day. You know, I hate to say it, but it is what it is.
I completely agree. And I think that's what you're seeing with the new generations, right? Oh, my God, yeah. Is, you know, I reminisce about back in the day, and we were just doing it on our kind of family reunion, is understanding, you know, we didn't have the cell phone. You know, I just get on my bicycle and get lost. And I literally have to, back in the day, knock on a complete stranger's door, which you wouldn't want to do today.
No, not today.
And say, hey, listen, I'm lost. I have to call my mother or my father.
Can I use your house phone?
Yeah. And they're like, come on in, no problem.
Yeah, do you want water or anything? Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, no issues, no nothing. But I think that's kind of the, you know, when we go through sort of advancements in technology. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that, but you know, I think that the scale and the horizon of all those things change the way people actually how they want to, you know, where are they looking? Like kids today, what do they want to do? Yeah. Are they going to be like when I was younger? I was either going to be a police officer, a fireman, and I really liked the legal field.
I was gonna say because that was my next question. Yeah. At what age did you say? Because law school is a bitch. It's not easy. It is, yeah. Everyone I've talked to taking those bar exams is a ringer. Totally. You know, at what age did you say, "Hey, I want to get into the law. I want to get into practicing law and things like that"?
So like I said, I had an aspiration when I was probably in my teens, just having a fascination with a lot of the legal shows that I've watched when I was younger.
I want to pause you. It's what you said, you know, when you were younger, police officer, firefighter, a lawyer, we don't hear that today.
No.
We hear, I want to be a YouTuber, you know, maybe an OnlyFans or whatever, but that's what we hear, a content creator. It's not those professions anymore.
What's the sustainability, honestly?
Oh, agreed. And because of it, I think in the next 10 to 20, 30 years, you're going to see those individuals actually charge more money because it's going to go back to supply and demand.
Totally.
There's not going to be that, just like pilots. There are not that many people wanting to get their pilot's license, so they're actually paying more pilots, but they're also capped out on how many hours they can fly. So, you know, that's why they're offering crazy bonuses to get people interested in flying planes. And I think in the legal space, yes, you're going to have a lot of people that want to be attorneys, but eventually, because everyone wants to be content creators, there's going to be a point where attorneys are going to say, yeah, we don't charge $400 an hour, we charge $600 to $1,000 an hour, which your very, very good attorneys will charge high, you know, close to $1,000 an hour or even more. But I think you're going to start to see that as the norm, as you know, the supply of attorneys actually start to decrease through law school.
I agree, and then that has to do with, you know, kind of, I think, and we'll get into AI as well because I've been heavily involved in that. But you're going to see a lot of folks trying to do like the Zoom legal thing and this and that, and I appreciate that because it's, you know, a frugality, and I think you can teach yourself some things, but, you know, there's going to be a necessary evil in a way, because sometimes I don't even mention my legal background, but constantly in my current business and my last sort of decade and a half, a lot of folks don't know that I had an extensive legal background. And
which helps in negotiation.
Of course. So just doing contract review and making sure that you can think about what you're trying to prevent, because, you know, the way contracts work, they're kind of built to be broken in a lot of ways.
Oh, 100%.
You know, and then that's when the lawyers have to step in.
And they're built to have gray areas. I mean,
absolutely.
I'm going through a custody battle. Everything's gray.
Of course.
You know, everything is gray. So what are these attorneys doing? They're milking all of us. You know, that's what they're doing.
I just said that to a buddy of mine going through a similar thing.
Yeah.
And the lawyers win, and that's fine.
100%.
But, you know, I think, like you said, there's going to be a narrowing of that. And, you know, I think those that have bad behavior and are disingenuous and bad, you know, intent, I think that's also something that will kind of line the pockets of the lawyers as well.
Yeah. The unsexy businesses make the most money.
Yeah.
Let's talk about HVAC companies, plumbing company, electrical companies. Those charge more per hour than attorneys do. And I think you're going to see that as well, that those trade professions start to increase their price. Why? I've never heard of someone saying, hey, I'm going to school to be a plumber.
Right.
Hey, I'm going to school to be an electrician.
Yeah.
Never heard of someone say that. Now, you will have family generations that have owned companies and will go to school to take over the business, but I've never heard someone saying, oh, I can't wait to go be a plumber.
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, so I think you're going to see that type of trade profession as well.
I don't think AI is going to fix your pipes if you have a leak at midnight.
It's not. It's not going to help you, rewire a home, or a basement. So those type of professions are always going to be around.
Yeah.
It's always getting hotter out. It's all, during the wintertime, it's getting cool, so you need the heat.
For sure.
And those are businesses. I tell people, if you can buy it from someone who's selling because they're old and they want to retire, do it. All you have to do is come in, do some great marketing, great, phenomenal customer service, and scale it.
Absolutely.
And
you got to be able to deliver it too, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think that, and you're very experienced in the real estate area, which is obviously a topic you cover, but I think, those cohorts of contractors and everything else, they are necessary, but also at the same time, they will charge in these emerging markets and charge a pretty penny. And what are you going to say? No, they kind of know, and you're not
going to say no when it's 105 out and
Right.
and your wife or girlfriend saying, "Honey, I'm hot." Exactly. You got a dog and a kid in the house. You're going to say, "Well, here's the credit card," and it is what it is.
My HVAC just went in Miami, and it's kind of like.
You said last night you rent, right?
Yeah, renting.
I don't blame you. I rent too.
Yeah, I mean, at this
it's the
point,
way to go.
At this point in time, not knowing what maybe the next 6 months will unfold and what we've kind of been through.
It's the smartest thing.
Yeah, I think that
you just call your landlord up, hey, come fix the HVAC. And in the state of North Carolina, if they don't address it within 24 hours, you can actually move into or go into a hotel, and you have to cover the cost as a landlord.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I'm not sure in Florida, but
I don't know about in Florida.
But our owner of the unit, which we're trying to work out like a kind of rent to own potentially. Yeah. But he got it done in a day, and we were very grateful.
I love that. So
it's quite interesting. The dynamic we're in. And, understanding, like you said earlier, just to get back to the first thing you said was, who wants to kind of get into the legal field or a policeman. I actually, when I got into undergrad and, I got accepted to various schools, I also, think that, and again, we can cover tons of topics, but not that I was a great athlete, but as I was also working as a young person, I was also, in different athletics, right? Mm-hmm. I was playing sports, 3 times a year, winter, spring, and fall. I was doing football, basketball, and lacrosse. So I was quite active, but I would actually have a football game on a Saturday at 1 o'clock. And I was the only one on the team that would, dust myself off and get pretty banged up and then go work.
Yeah.
And, I did that, but, I was able still to go to the party at midnight, catch up with the boys and that type of thing. So, but when I was going to apply for undergrad, I was getting recruited. Not that I was, I wasn't a D1 athlete in any way, shape, or form, but, D3 schools that have good programs to maybe give you a little bit of money, I was getting recruited. And I ended up going to a smaller school. And because I liked the law and I had a lot of law enforcement in my family, and my father was, of course, a fireman, I decided to major in criminal justice.
Love that.
Which is interesting, but at the end of the day, as I was going through that process, I was like, well, what the heck can you do with criminal justice?
Yeah.
You're going to teach, you're going to work as a correction officer, a police officer, FBI, that type of thing. And, I had those aspirations, and I always watched my uncles and other folks in my family, go through that process. But it was also a lot of stress on the family.
Oh, I'm sure.
And, I saw my aunts, kind of like, where are you? I even saw it in my own home because my father, before he left, it was like always, where's Dad? Well, Dad's at the firehouse. And during that period, they had a lot of fires going on, right? Yeah. So, at that period of time, he was actually fighting fires. And they didn't have the apparatus and all that other stuff. So as I went through undergrad, I said to myself, you know what? Either I'm going to be a police officer or I'm going to try to get into law school. Yeah. Now, I was a fairly mediocre student. But, you had to take the entrance exams and all that. So I ended up applying to a bunch of law schools. I ended up getting in. And what I also did, which I think is very lacking in today's day and age, is because of my work ethic, I was very motivated early on in my undergraduate. I went to a small school in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. I decided to throw a suit on, my friends make fun of me because for many years I'd wear a suit and they'd be like, Brian.
I used to wear suits 7 days a week.
Right?
Yeah, and now I just wear all black. Same thing. You saw me last night in this. I just wear all black.
We're cut a lot from the same cloth. Oh, yeah. So now that I migrated to Florida, this is rare that I have a jacket on, but I wanted to obviously be here and dress for the show. But,
I appreciate it.
But at the end of the day, I said, okay, I need to make a little bit of dough so I can go out and party with my friends in college, but I also want to be able to gain the experience and touch a little bit. Kind of like I analogize it with cars. You're gonna buy a car, you're gonna test drive it.
Oh yeah.
You're gonna go buy, except for probably, albeit in COVID times, if you want to buy a house, you want to do a walkthrough.
Most definitely.
Eventually.
Oh yeah.
So what I decided to do is I said, listen, I'm gonna throw on a jacket, a suit, and walk around the court square and actually door knock. So I door knocked at 17 years old as a freshman in college, and I said, I'd like to get an internship. I want to learn about the law. I'm aspiring to potentially go to law school. I'm a criminal justice major.
That's the best way to do it too, because you're gonna get that thick skin. I used to door knock when I was a real estate broker, right when I first created the company I did, and you're gonna get doors slammed in the face, cussed out. Now maybe a little different when you're in a law firm. You'll have the receptionist say no, get on.
Like they're looking at me with three heads, like, what are you doing here?
I know, but I love that drive. It goes back to what we talked about. In the younger days of your life, you have that drive, that motivation that you're gonna throw on a suit. You're gonna go down to all the law firms and knock on the doors. Yeah. And I think it's super important.
Yeah, it worked.
Oh yeah.
And but the thing is, I kind of I always call it like a kicker when we do our equity deals. Like what kind of incentive? I said, well, a lot of these internships that students seek are unpaid, and you have work study and all that. And I was in the work study program, but I told these professionals, and it was kind of a big ask. I said, well, I need to be paid.
Yeah.
I come from this background, self-sufficient. Mom and dad are not paying for college. I need a little bit of scratch, if you will, to do the things I do. So, did I get minimum wage? But it didn't really matter about the money. It was good to have that. It was incentivizing, but it was more about the experience.
I always say, and it's funny because we have an internship program with the company, and some of the interns that we look to hire, that we interview, they want 60 to 80,000, and I'm like, you guys are a sophomore in college, like you have no experience. And I tell them, I said, look, you're seeing it wrong. You should not worry about the money, and I understand you got to make ends meet. So ask for minimum wage. That's what you should do. But you really should look at it from an angle of, I'm gaining the knowledge. Totally. What can I use, and how can I use this knowledge that I'm gaining with this experience and this opportunity that I just got to better and to project me to where I want to be? And a lot of college kids do not do that. They don't use that thought process to say, okay, what can I learn from this firm? How can I use this on my resume to grow to the next level? And that's how they should be thinking of it, instead of coming in saying, I want $80,000. Yeah. And it's like, well, you have zero experience. You're a sophomore in college. Go on about your day.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think you're going to see, as young people want to achieve some type of career. And again, it also has an idea with the parenting, right? And how they're 100%. Being supported. And I watch my brothers do it. They've done a phenomenal job. They're all very well off. Their children are, I think, very much incentivized, kind of taking the best attributes of their childhood and then kind of putting that onto their kids. Oh, yeah. And they could pay for everything, but they all have instilled similar to what happened to them, which is, trying to get some work going early age, getting the discipline and the ability to, communicate. I think that's a big problem today with young people as well.
They can't communicate.
I'm in Florida, and I meet, these young entrepreneurs. They may be in the crypto space. I think we were mentioning that last night, this and that, which again is an interesting asset class, and they've made a lot of money. But you want to try to talk to them in this fashion, unless they're like practicing as an influencer, they're going to have a difficult time just communicating, they're afraid.
I've said this multiple times, and everyone's going to say, you've already said it on a podcast, Chris. But what I say is that I used to always tell the younger generation, never give up, which is true. Don't give up. However, the biggest way to get to where you want to be is learn how to speak. Learn how to formulate sentences. Learn how to place words, strategically into sentences. Exactly. practicing law will teach you that. I've read so many contracts. I've corrected, and I'm dyslexic, and I've corrected so many attorneys by reviewing contracts and documents, legal, SEC documents, and I'm like, hey, it's not supposed to be worded this way, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, it needs to be worded this way. And so if you don't know how to do that, I think you're going to really limit yourself. You're going to limit yourself into certain rooms that you get in. And one thing that we discussed last night is that no matter what, you were telling me you were hearing a podcast, and you were it was like a 4-hour podcast you were listening to on your road trip.
Yeah.
And the gentleman sounds so convincing. And it's so true. If you have the energy and the way you speak and the tone on how you word sentences,
totally,
you will be so convincing.
Absolutely.
And if you don't know how to practice that, start practicing it now. But it will help you in sales. It will help you in whatever avenue you want to go to. But especially when you get into those certain rooms, if you don't know how to speak, they're going to look at you that you're uneducated, that you shouldn't be in those rooms, and you're eventually going to get kicked out of those type of rooms.
It kind of starts with the interview process.
Oh,
right?
my God, yeah.
And you have someone, and I've interviewed dozens and dozens of either interns or employees throughout my various career. And I think, the delivery and the ability to, I always say kind of trust and verify, because they can sound very convincing, but you want to be able to go that extra layer. You were talking about, different ways to find the information that you need. Everyone has, the chat GPTs of the world, and search engines and Google, and when we were younger, it was like, you're picking up a, maybe my generation, you're picking up a book like an encyclopedia to figure out what's going on, or you're just learning kind of like through the streets or from family in terms of, what is going on here.
The best way to learn, and I do this personally, is that I will type up an email. I will copy and paste it in ChatGPT. And this is what I did early on when ChatGPT just got released. I'd copy and paste it in there, and then I'd copy and paste it directly back in the email, send it off. Now what I do is, because I've done it so many times, I have a good sense of what ChatGPT is how they're gonna word my paragraphs.
Sure.
So what I do is I copy and paste it in there, and then I read it very thoroughly.
Totally.
What was the differences? How are they wording this compared to this?
Absolutely.
Why are they doing this? And now it's changed my whole vocabulary and how I speak and how I write, because I basically have ChatGPT in my head, because I've used it, I've mimicked it, and I understand the algorithm.
Yeah,
and
no doubt.
Do that a handful of times, understand it. I used to watch David Rubenstein, CEO of Carlyle. He has a phenomenal show on YouTube. I used to watch that, and every business leader, president he's interviewed, everything, to listen to how they speak,
Super
how they word sentences, so I can mimic that, because these are prominent leaders or business owners, and it's super important to mimic someone else's success.
1,000%. And I think you touched upon it there briefly. You're going a little bit of the extra mile.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the young people today, and even our age and maybe some older, the teaching of comprehension is to actually absorb it and learn. Because a lot of folks, if you actually ask them what did they write, they can't even take it from that email and just put out one sentence, say, well, this is what I was intending to, because you have your intent, but also how does the communication derive a result, right? Yeah. And it's hard to have young people today, I think, also retain and comprehend what's going on, and then that, if they don't do that, they're going to have a difficult time communicating.
Oh, most definitely.
I mean? So
yeah.
It's,
and you have to know how to communicate, especially in this environment, the world that we live in. If you can't communicate at a high level, it's going to be very difficult for you to get very far. Absolutely. Now, you're going through law school. Walk us through that process and your thoughts through law school and what you want to do right outside.
Yeah, so one little mini step back, went through 4 years of undergrad, worked in 4 or 5 law firms, got it accepted to 2 or 3 law schools. I would call them second or third tier law schools. Yeah. I'm not Ivy League material, nor am I whatever attempt to get law review or anything. I'm really more of that hands-on experience. So I end up choosing a smaller but an old law school in downtown Manhattan called New York Law School, and I make sure that I tell everyone it's not NYU, because it's a whole nother ballpark. But what I loved about New York Law School, NYLS, was the fact that a lot of the professors were not these tenured sort of lifelong professors that are continuing to publish and do research and do those law review type of things that are going to influence policy and do all these things. I was more of a practical, hands-on guy, where I said, how can I service clients and figure out how you can because my mind was always heading towards disruption, right? And understanding how that works. So what was great about that school is I would have a judge that was working all day, and he would come teach the class. So there's this thing in law school where you have theory and practice, and it's in any field that you're in. They're going to teach the theory, even in medical school. But when you get out of medical school, by example, you're going to have to get into that cadaver, and you're going to have to actually do your rounds,
start performing,
and do all those sort of internships and practice. And I think we got a little bit of an early start at MYLS because you had practicing attorneys coming in saying, all right, here's the book, here's the case law, here's all the subject matter that you're going to learn, but you need to be able to take that and then actually
apply it.
Yeah, apply it. And just what we talked about is like, how do you communicate with clients, and then how do you actually get a just result, whether you're in the criminal space, whether you're in the sort of estate planning, anything and everything in the legal space. Is they teach you when you work in the various law firms, which I worked in like I think 6 or 7 from age 17 to like 21, 22, 23. I got a very large landscape and cascade effect of the different practice areas. And it was really selfishly for my benefit to understand like, what do I like? But the conclusion was at the end of law school, taking the New York and New Jersey bar exam and understanding all that, I kind of said to myself, I don't think I want to be a lawyer.
Really?
And for me, it was, or at least practice full time. I found, and I think I caught what we will definitely get into, which is serial entrepreneurship and understanding how, and again, I'm very capital driven, and, obviously I think our most valuable asset is time.
Oh my God.
And if I'm going to spend my time, how do I, have financial freedom and have the ability to, get into an industry or have variety? Because what I found was when I worked in law firms, I was, started in the back, like by where the library is. And
you were a runner.
Yeah,
that's what they did.
Stuff.
They ran you to the courthouse to file documents, other law firms.
You totally
that's the bottom of that's the bottom of the food chain.
Absolutely. But it was great because, I was able to get out of the office a little bit, but I was also being, pressured to bill. Even as like a student, I had, back in the day, you had sheets where you had to like
write down your hours.
And, they were teaching you, say, well, wink, wink. And again, I'm not trying to expose some sort of like fraudulent thing in the legal space, but, that took you 10 minutes, but it probably really took you a half hour. And they always try to pressure you to bill.
Oh my God, yeah.
And as you're a lawyer, you're there for, let's say, 80, 100 hours a week, and you're billing more than time you're actually there. And I'm dealing with lawyers all the time. And one thing I will do is I will negotiate because I came from that world. Yeah. I understand that.
I know it. It's super important because you are 100% right. And I say this, I don't like lawyers. I like you, but I don't like lawyers. I don't like doctors. Yeah. And same with mechanics. I don't know. Mechanics, I'm not a fan of.
They got control.
Correct. And that's why I don't like it.
Yeah.
We have a tremendous amount of lawyers and legal counsel that we have on not on staff, but on retainer. And one of our legal counsel, this was like 4 months ago, sent a bill to myself because they bill once a month, and it was like over $1,600. And I emailed him. I said, I don't have any recollection that we emailed last month. Right. We never even have one phone call last month. Yeah. And so why are you sending us a almost $2,000 bill?
Right.
And he said, well, this opposing counsel sent me this. I said, well, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I'm not paying it. We had no conversation about anything. Just because opposing counsel sent you something and you decided to spend 7 to 10 hours on it, I'm sorry.
And it comes at an interesting time. Just like, the police, they got a quota in a way, they're trying to, drive billable. And, that's the other thing I think, getting back to kind of the theme we've been talking about, is young people, they'll challenge the wrong things.
Correct.
You need to be able to, and I talk to, because, I'm looking at my nieces and nephews now that now have children. Mm-hmm. It's amazing to see how, but when I look at them, I still look at them as that little kid I was babysitting back in the day.
Oh, I bet.
But I tell them, I'm like, if you don't ask, you don't get, right?
Correct.
The answer is always no, all these little adages, but you can negotiate. Mm-hmm. That lawyer does not want to lose you as a client. You're going to have to say, listen, even if you attempt and they have, bona fide evidence that they did do something, that $1,600 should be about $1,000, because they'll know eventually that they'll make that up.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I mean, I went through a scenario on this road trip where I was at a restaurant, and I'm a big UFC combat sports
I am
fan.
too.
And we were watching the fights, and we came in there to watch the fights, me, my girlfriend, and her friend, and they were trying to charge us each like $80 or $100 a person. Now, I understand they have to offset the pay-per-view side of things.
Correct. It is expensive for the bar side.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
And I'm always practical because all I want is people that spend their time to make money.
100%.
Okay, because it offsets your most valuable thing, which is time.
That's right.
And we were put off because they're like, you can't sit at this table unless you spend $300 for 3 of us. And I'm like, I can't eat that much food or drink that much whatever. And at the end of the day, I said, if you just let us sit here, we probably would have spent that same amount anyway. Yeah. So I left.
No.
And everyone at that bar were leaving just because, and I was like, this is, not smart business.
No, it's not. Not
and
at all.
And if you have the ability to have flexibility, you'll get further down the field and you'll score more if you have the ability to not only challenge, but to ask in the right way and have the right delivery.
It's cheaper for you to cater the food and pay $60 and
home.
watch it at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Bring your friends at home, cater some food for $100.
Exactly.
Now you're all in at $160.
Yeah.
It's peace and quiet. You don't got other people yip yapping.
Better view.
And now you guys can focus on it.
Yeah. So my point there is like, you have to be able to ask and understand with the professionals that you hire, because you're in control of that relationship, even though they think they are, because they're the experts, right? Yeah. And they should be cognizant. And I use this all the time. Not that I'm some sort of like person that's complaining, but I tell people no matter what, because I have shareholders, I have my peers and folks like yourself that. We're looking at various investments.
Oh, yeah.
The things that you're doing, which you're doing a phenomenal
Thank
job,
you.
by the
Thank
way.
you.
I got the update last night.
Thank you.
And at the end of the day, it's like, you want to be able to understand how to, communicate and be able to, I don't want to say return to your shareholders, but you have to be able to make sure what you're doing is going to have an impact. And that's all about customer service.
100%.
So no matter what, I'm not like, I don't have customers, but I always say I'm in the customer service business.
Everyone is.
No matter what.
No matter what you do, you're in the customer service business. That's why I don't understand when people are rude and things like that. It's like, no matter what business you are in, it is customer service. Absolutely. I don't care what it is. There's different levels of it. You have more interaction with certain customers than others, with business, things like that. But no matter what you do, it is customer service. If you don't know how to give great customer service, you're going to limit your success in any business that you're in, any career that you're doing, if you cannot provide phenomenal customer service. That is what's going to separate everyone these days. Absolutely. That's what separates the Ritz-Carlton from Motel 8. All of that is the customer service experience. And as AI comes into this world and really enhances a lot of different type of things, it's going to come down to who has better customer service.
Absolutely.
Just look, for example, I don't eat McDonald's or fast food, but if you look at McDonald's and look at Chick-fil-A, I know if the line is wrapped around that Chick-fil-A building, they're going to get it done within 5 minutes.
It's an amazing
operation. I know at McDonald's, you're going to wait 30 minutes to get that food. Totally different level of customer service and experience, and that's why Chick-fil-A, even closed on Sundays, produce crazy amount of numbers. I looked at some of their reporting for this year. One of their sites, and I believe it's in Florida, produces their most producing site. It was like 19.7 million annually, and they're closed on Sundays.
And it's probably the healthiest option you have, just by the way.
When it comes to fast food,
exactly.
I mean, a lot of, definitely. So it's astonishing that people don't bring that customer service anymore because they feel entitled that they should be respected. It's a definitely different mindset with this younger generation. They're going to have to get back on the bandwagon of you need to give great customer service. It's super important.
Absolutely. Just one little note on that too is because I've learned, and I think this is, what listeners should hear about too is kind of like, again, going back to young folks and how we work ethic and everything else is, I found myself sort of 10, 15 years ago, I was very reactive, so I checked into the hotel last night and you have to have the sensibility in your awareness. People are entitled to have a bad day.
Oh my God, yeah.
So if I'm getting a little bit of shade or attitude, I try to pause myself and I think about like, all right, try to have some empathy and say, understand, you know what? I'm going to see how this goes. And if it gets worse and I'm getting more shade or attitude, I'm going to obviously call that person out. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times I have to just kind of let it go and say, you know what? I don't know what happened to this person today. Mm. They may be having a bad day, or they may have just got reamed out. Because sometimes, and I see it all the time because I travel, and I know you travel quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Like airports and these very stressful, got to get to a place
They're
at
rude
a certain
as hell.
time.
That's another reason why I want to fly private is one, definitely time.
Yes.
It's a time machine. That's what it is. It's not a private jet. It's a time machine. Totally. Number two, airports, nasty, and they're just rude for no damn reason. And I understand you're seeing millions of people, on a weekly basis come in and out of the airport. But hey, if you can't handle the customer service experience, go get in another damn industry.
Absolutely.
Period.
Absolutely.
There are millions of jobs out there. Stop complaining. Go get yourself in another industry.
Exactly.
Period.
And there are, despite, everyone says there are jobs out there.
Oh my.
And that's the other thing is trying to figure out and navigate. And as we kind of dabble in my career and, we kind of mirror each other in some ways where, this serial entrepreneurship is you want to make impact, yep. but you also want to be able to dive into different emerging industries in order to obviously, drive revenue and make sure you have that good customer service.
You have to know when to pivot. If you don't know how to pivot or evaluate markets, sure. I mean, I've said this plenty of times. That's what I did in 2022. I noticed that $400 to $500 rent increases for paint and carpet will not last. No. And so I said, let's sell. And then what is another asset class that's not going to be impacted? Because like I said last night, in my opinion, from now until about 2026, 2027, multifamily is going to be very difficult. It's going to be hard to push rents. It's going to be very little cash flow and very little returns. Totally. You're going to see, instead of a 2 to 3 year hold period that all these syndicators did, you're going to now see 7 to 10 years because of that market environment. So I had to make a strategic decision with the company and with our investors to say, hey, we're pivoting asset classes. This is why. And we're all in on it. Absolutely. And they loved it. We're doing very well on it. But you have to, as a leader, you have to understand market trends. You have to be able to read that and say, okay, now's the time to pivot. And if you can't pivot, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, look at COVID. A lot of people made money in COVID.
It treated a lot of people well.
A lot of people did not. Yeah. And you saw a lot of the older generation that didn't want to use technology or anything like that to help pivot their company, and they all went out of business.
Absolutely.
You saw certain industries use technology, get on that, and boom, skyrocketed their business.
Yeah. That moment, and when I talk to people and I see people since I moved to Florida during the pandemic, I kind of, not that I erased those years because those years were very good to me, and I think market-wise, and I think people confuse the economy with the stock market, and there's just a lot of uneducated investors or retail or meme investors.
I thought Reddit was the best way to go.
Exactly.
I thought that's where you get all your financial advice from, huh?
Yeah, you got these old Wall Streeters kind of turning, well, some of them turning over in their grave, but some of them are just like, what is going on? But I think it creates disruption. It creates opportunity. And I think that, a lot of those folks also, too, think it's going to last forever. So like you said, you need to be able to pivot, and you need to be able to, I don't want to use a Canadian analogy, but see where the puck is going. Yeah. But also, I think we're going through multiple layers of consolidation. A lot of the concentration of wealth is in these Mag 7 stocks, and then you have the BlackRocks and all these that are disrupting the real estate side of things. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how everything unfolds, not only on a global basis but macro. And then I try and tend to take care of my own backyard and be in an environment where there is frothy capital markets, which is obviously Brickell and Miami, what was once New York. But, I think that's really important, is to understand, where do you want to live? How do you want to be productive? Who do you want to associate yourself with? And then figure out what the next thing's going to happen. Because when I see disruption and then I see industries, I've always been attracted to industries that I'm not a big, in favor of regulation, but when certain industries get regulated, I see a huge opportunity. Yeah. So when everyone's kind of rushing out the door, I'm kind of like sneaking in and figuring out what's going on to figure out what the deficiencies or discrepancies is, to go to my cohort and investors to say, here's an opportunity, because I did, while I was in law school, missed out on this internet bubble when everyone's like, I don't want to use email. And I wasn't a gamer. Yeah. I didn't really, I wasn't really focused on any of that, because I was more about how can I spend my time and grind and work, build relationships, and take those and then figure out at some point how do you monetize those relationships.
Oh, for sure.
So I think those sectors are very attractive, and that's what I've been doing sort of the last 2 decades is trying to, what you've done as well, is pivot into certain asset classes, but also sectors that you can, be ahead of the game.
Most definitely.
And then figure out how you get in and how you exit, and exit in a proper way.
I hope you're enjoying today's episode. Just a quick reminder to make sure you never miss an episode. Stay connected with us by following us on social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, TikTok at Chris_Salerno_. And don't forget to subscribe to YouTube to catch the video versions of our episode. You'll get exclusive content, behind the scenes footage, and much more. Head over to YouTube, Chris_Salerno now, and hit the subscribe button. Stay tuned because we've got more great content coming right after this. I love it. Let's dive straight into it. Let's talk about your capital market experience. $3 billion plus investments transacted. Let's touch on that, and then I want to touch on with your experience of AI and really taking companies public. Also, qualifiedcap.com. Want to talk about that.
Sure.
So let's dive straight into it. First, talk to us about the capital market experience. $3 billion investments.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So I always say when I'm kind of introducing myself, and I try to keep it, as terse or as consolidated as possible. But, early days, I didn't think I was going to be in this sector at all because I was intrigued during that .com, which was really the .bomb era, where all these stocks were kind of imploding, and the ones that survived. And again, I mentioned that because that's what I think is going to happen in the AI. Everyone's talking about an AI bubble. There's a lot of fear mongering. Terminator's going to come in here and rule the world. They're just being
not with my Belgian.
Yeah, exactly. We talked about that too. It's going to be necessary to have those types of things in place. But singularity and all these things. I don't know how quick it will happen, but we're definitely on track for all this. But getting to the capital market side, I try to tell people. And again, it could be my own sort of limited or kind of weird ADD. I've been a capital markets, I call it journeyman. So I started off as a trader in 1999. Actually, I graduated in 2000, so it was like just after 2000.
What type of assets were you trading?
It was NASDAQ stocks, market making. So we had an institutional sales desk.
That was the old school when it was like Wolf of Wall Street time when you had the little Rolodex you'd call.
Totally. So I was more on the trading side, but what it taught me was that the Goldman Sachses of the world and all these folks that were pushing orders, there was 2 things that were happening at that time. You wanted to follow the smart money, which of course the most talented folks were at the Goldmans of the world. They understood valuation, and they had a good predictor of what would survive. And I kind of look at, again, nothing against Mark Cuban. I talk about how, not to say that he got lucky, but, timing is also very appropriate. I missed sort of the timing of it all. The firm I was at went through their training program, got all my securities licenses, 7, 63, 55. You can look it up. It's like 79. There are all these licenses and tests that you have to take in order to be in that regulated industry. But I also learned how to trade stock. I honestly didn't know a stock from my elbow. But when I was in law school, I was watching guys leave the classroom because there was no phone, go to the library, go onto the computer because it was the initial days of online brokerage.
Internet,
Charles Schwab, and we had a firm, it was called National Discount Brokers Group. Point is that they eventually sold these businesses to a larger bank. All of my colleagues that were there longer than I was, maybe 6 to 8 to 10 months, kind of hit the lottery ticket. We were a publicly traded company on the NYSE, and I didn't earn my options or anything because I was about a month late. So everyone kind of hit the lottery and was, and mind you, I'm 23 years old.
Yeah.
I'm seeing dollar signs. I'm watching guys make $1 million.
You're on Wall Street.
Yeah, $1 million take home a month. Some guys, trading.
And back then, that's a lot of money.
Total, a lot of money. And again, we talked about that last time, is relative of like the sphere you're in. And I never really saw any of that time.
Yeah.
Type of money. And so I was on a desk of 282 guys and 2 gals, and not that was a point, but it was a very call it testosterone environment.
And finance is. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Totally. Finance is mainly a man-dominant type of industry.
It totally is. And fist fights, keyboards being thrown. I had a can of Mountain Dew thrown at my head, and, screaming, and it brought me back to my football days. It was like
it's the Hunger Games.
I'm like, I feel like I was ready to go every morning. We had to be at our desk at 7 a.m.
Yep.
And again, it taught me a different way. But what I learned is how and it's not so true today, how institutions back then truly controlled the market. So they were feeding us orders. Which was the other important thing back there in terms of technology evolution, was how do you execute trades the quickest? Because the firms wanted to get their stock, either shorting a stock, because there was a lot of shorting going on back then. And it was, I think, and again, I don't have bona fide evidence of this, but there was a lot of illegal shorting.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because they know these stocks were down, but guys were making a fortune figuring out that particular .com was just a
Fugazi.
a bag of hammers.
Yeah.
It was like nothing, you know what I mean? And so went through that for a period of time. But when the firm was bought out, I was kind of sitting there with a $5,000, severance pay, and, you have your medical benefits for a couple months. And then I'm sitting there saying, well, should I get back into law? What should I do here? But I have all these licenses. Anyway, long story short, I end up getting into the investment banking world. So I learned how now the banking side of things work, which is dealing with, NASDAQ and small and micro cap CEOs, and taking them on an individual basis to guys like you to meet management and say, hey, Chris, what do you think about this deal? Let me show it to you now. It's a non-deal roadshow, this, that, and the other thing. The company may invest at some point, this, that, and the other thing. And I was doing that also with institutions. So I was always kind of, as a young person, on a one-way flight to different capital markets to talk to. We had this list called Big Dough, and you had all these different things where you can find out on like a cold calling basis, like, hey, Chris, that was something that was taught too. Is like, I have an interesting idea. I wasn't like a Wolf of Wall Street stockbroker, but those same parameters worked really well in that environment, because you had a biotech or healthcare deal that, may be trading at $2 or $3. They may be in a phase 2 of their pharmaceutical evolution. But I learned sort of my training wheels there, where I was heading to these capital markets, sitting across very sophisticated chartered financial analysts, research analysts, investment bankers that were, or funds that had institutional, capital that wanted to put into these deals, and understood how those cycles and the round table worked on, not that it's very collusionary, if you will, if that's even a word, but how they all kind of play together.
Yeah, it's a small world.
And how companies become, which is very rare, the Facebooks, the Metas, the Nvidias, didn't necessarily play in the venture capital arena, which we called back then vulture capital, and I still think today it's a lot of vulturistic stuff.
Oh yeah.
Over the last couple of decades, and as I morphed into my own advisory business, and now I've been sitting more in the C-suite and in the board of director suite, is really how we can do value-added investing. So anything that I do today, and again, I'll jump around, but is how can I bring value, bring a network effect, community, and understand how we can get you in, and also the liquidity element, which I'm sure we'll touch upon. So got in banking. In 2002, I got recruited or introduced, if you will, to a small direct investment fund. Some would call it a hedge fund, but it was a non-correlated asset manager that was making direct investments in small companies, but highly structured. So in that time, I, was able to take all my contract work from the legal side of my career and apply it to how do you structure deals so that, you have LPs. We had LPs, and those LPs never want to lose money.
Correct.
And you want to make sure you have a positive return every month.
Oh, most definitely.
So early on in my age, probably 24, 25 years old, they handed me the alphabet and they said, call these lettered CEOs or companies. And that's what I did. I was on a 3-month draw where I was getting paid $3,000 a month. I was in a relationship at the time. I think I may have just gotten engaged, and they're looking at me like, what the heck are you doing? Why are you working for this firm? Why are you taking this risk? just go back and get paid $100,000 as a lawyer. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be buried and hope to get a partnership in 6 years and work 150. I'm like, if you don't want to see me, then I'll go do that type of thing. So that was a pivotal time in my career. 3 months go by. I'm not really doing well. I'm hustling and grinding like I always did since I was a young person. But as a lot of changes happened in my life at that point in time, I end up securing a deal and getting my first deal.
Love that.
Got paid $100,000 in one check.
I
paid back my $9,000, and I said, "Holy shit, this is something that I can do, and I'm good at it. I know how to get through the gatekeepers to get to the CEO and CFO, but also to do my research to be very crafty in order to get through to them, because it's hard to find a company that's already publicly traded, that already had a banker, that either needs capital, may need capital of last resort, maybe going out of business, or they want growth capital." And so,
I'm going to interrupt. I always say, and I wish my mentor and coach taught me this when I first created QC, is understand the art of raising capital. You need to master it. Because 100%. In good times and in bad times, people always need capital.
Yes.
And if you don't know how to raise capital, if you are not understanding it, if you are not mastering raising capital, you're not going to get very far in the private equity industry. Absolutely. And I've learned that the hard way, and that is what our sole focus is. That's why we have a podcast to help educate people. That is our sole focus, is becoming a master at raising capital, because in good times and bad times, you will always need it.
It's the core of, anything. And we're not going to get into politics. It's kind of crazy, but you're hearing about all this capital being raised very quickly.
Oh yeah.
And I was always told, well, money doesn't matter, and I go, absolutely does matter.
Oh my God,
and how can you actually get capital in? But the right investor, I've dealt with all sorts. I've been threatened. It's insane. Shareholders, some of them, have had, I don't know, $1,000 in a company. And it's like, and they may be a $10 million player, and they're very cognizant about that $1,000, and I get it, and I'm like, well, it's interesting. So you get that thick skin, you understand all that, and when I went into this fund structure, there were two things that I was helping out with. Is as you raise more capital, you have to deploy it, right? And we got pretty big pretty quick. It was a $5 million AUM fund. We scaled within a couple years to probably $500 million.
Wow.
And then we started getting third-party marketers and other cap intro firms. Globally, we took money from Middle East. We took money from everywhere.
Really?
And eventually, we were about $1 billion player. But we had the track record because of the structuring that we do. So if a company came to us, they wanted $2, $3, $4, $5 million. We try to figure out, as a public company and using the regulatory guidelines and having really good lawyers, understand how we could protect downs and maximize upside and the LP. So we never had a down month for 6 years, which obviously in volatile markets, there was some volatility in 2005. And then, of course, coming into 2008 was a time when I ended up departing. But long story short, through that period of time, I must have sat down with, I don't know, it had to have been about 1,000 CEOs.
Wow.
And coming to our office, sitting down with them, and that didn't happen overnight because, as I said, I was cold calling originally.
Oh yeah.
But what I found was the best technique, and I don't want to not that I have secrets, but the service providers were the best origination partners I had. So I found out very early, instead of calling the companies directly, I would call the accountants and lawyers.
Wow.
So I'd read the filing.
Yeah.
I say, oh, who's the law firm that's on this file?
Putting it together.
Yeah. And I'd call them up. I'd introduce myself, because they'll take your call, because not that I was posing as a client, but they're like, who is this guy?
It's a potential client.
Oh, you have capital? And the lawyers of these companies would say, oh, the CEOs of the companies are always talking to the lawyers. We need to get a deal done. We need to structure our financing,
100%.
all this.
And the lawyers know if they are in need of rescue capital or anything, they know all of that.
Totally. And the accountants too, because I would read the financial statements and I would say, oh, well, this particular accounting firm, and we weren't necessarily dealing with the big 4, 5, or 6. It was these boutique accounting firms that I built a massive Rolodex of accountants and lawyers who are also, by the way, like to invest their money.
Oh, yeah.
And their clients were coming to them saying, well, we need to raise money. And, again, it's pretty logical. They need their bills to be paid.
Oh, 100%.
So if a public company doesn't have their money,
they're not going to get paid.
They're not going to get paid.
So if you're calling them saying, we have a fund that we go ahead and deploy capital, they're 100%. Like, well, this is a solution. We can go ahead and make an introduction. Yeah. They can get their bills paid, which then we would get paid in return.
Exactly. So through that time, I gained complete crazy experience.
Oh, I bet.
I was sometimes, a boat without a sail, because I was like, all right, well, what are we doing here type of thing. But that core group of folks, and I still have those relationships 10, 15, 20, 25 years later, because that's something's very important, is reputation and the ability to have long-standing relationships. There's a ton of bad actors in the environment that I'm in. But those lawyers and accountants, I see them, I'm going to be in September with a lot of them. They're like, hey, Brian, where you been? It's those things. What are you working on? Yeah. What's going on? And now, as we get to where I am today, but I'm now presenting to those investors and hiring those lawyers. So it's kind of come full circle. But during the time at the fund, we sat down with various management teams. There was some folks that were very fraudulent, and as we were talking about communication, they had a really good spiel, and I learned, and body language, like we talked about last night, and delivery, and understanding how these folks operate. It was quite interesting, and we would have to go back and say, I don't think we should invest. We like the company, but the manager, and then it was like, we like the manager, but the company needs help. Yeah. And the way we structured these deals and where those numbers, those $2-3 billion over the last 20 years have come from, is we had $1 billion. I was there for 7 years. These companies are always looking and raising for capital.
Always.
And we would always tell them, how much do you need? Oh, well, we need $5 million. All right, give us a use of proceeds. Let us know what this, and this.
Yeah. What are you doing with the capital? Where is it going?
Yeah, you need to make sure they're stewards of capital.
Give me your P&L. I want to analyze it. Yeah.
And because they're public, we had a great deal of visibility to their balance sheet
on a quarterly basis.
And then I'm talking to the lawyers and accountants, because when we would fund a deal, and guess who was getting paid? I wanted to make sure the lawyers and accountants were paid, not to the company.
Yeah,
direct pay.
Yep.
Because they needed to file their documents with the commission and make sure that the equity that we were getting was going to be free to trade at some point in time, and all this thing. So through that time, it was kind of like I was a lot of times I was like the host, the dishwasher, the cook, and serving the tables.
You were doing it all at once.
And it was great because, before I was 30, I was making a lot of money. I was able to have a very expansive network of professionals.
Love that.
And it was a great ride. It's just that, I think also you have to be careful of people that make a lot of money, and those that you've made a lot of money, they tend to focus on that more than the relationship. I focus. I don't know why. Maybe it's the way I've been raised, but I go back, and it's kind of a bit of a problem that I have sometimes, is that I give people multiple chances.
I used to have that problem,
and now I'm trying to narrow and say, you know what? Why am I even doing this? Yeah. Because my nature as I was raised is like, be good to people and act. Not even act. It's just my nature is good faith.
Yeah. So that's what your character is.
You don't want me on the other side, because eventually, if I keep on getting punched in the gut, I'm going to react. I don't want to do that at this point in my life. And so I'm just saying, and I found that this was something, fast forwarding, when I moved to Florida, all the people that I was hanging around in New York, let's meet for a drink, let's talk about a deal, let's do a dinner. There was no two-way street. I'm a huge two-way street
100%.
guy, because I'm always
You have to make it a win-win. Like,
you have to.
What people don't understand, I've said this so many times, so I'm just repeating myself, and it won't get into people's head, is that they go look at those the people out in Dubai, those individuals that all they have to do is move some sand and they got oil.
Yeah.
They're making billions of dollars a day.
Yeah.
The money is unlimited. Yeah. So what you really need to do is build a relationship, because right now I can strip you of all your capital and all your wealth, what are you going to rely on? You're going to rely on those relationships you've built.
That's exactly what happened.
If you ruin those relationships, and when the money goes gone, what do you have? You have nothing. Yeah. So rely on those relationships, and it's a long-term play. And I've said this multiple times. Building a business, building wealth is the game Monopoly. Yeah. It's you and I. If we started playing the game Monopoly, we're not going to get it done in an hour or two. No. We're going to get it done in 5 to 6 hours just by you and I playing.
For sure.
And that's how you need to see business. Is you need to really have the patience, the consistency, be able to hold yourself accountable. Yeah. And that's how you're going to grow a large, lasting business and wealth for your family.
Absolutely. So during the financial crisis, I was actually, at that point in time, I was pretty burnt out. Yeah. Plus, you have this whole side, and which is a real key component to relationships, is you got to go out to dinner. Mm-hmm. You got to get to know these folks, whether they're your LPs or the CEOs. Everyone wants to come to New York. I deal with, and one of my specialities over the last decade and a half is working with Canadian companies and Canadian investors that want to transact or when you look at Canada population is about the size of California. Oh, really?
So it's basically like California too, from what I heard.
A lot of that, but when you narrow it down to the capital market side, it's very, very finite. Really? But they've done a lot of really good things of getting ahead of interesting industries. Again, I've dabbled and I had a lot of success in the regulated cannabis space. Mm. And that was something that they were a first mover, and they were a first mover in this psychedelic space, which was kind of a flop. It was like, sort of up and then really quick down. But
we had a psychedelic guy on our show, and we talked about mushrooms and ayahuasca, and I call him the scientist because he has a full laboratory that tests different types of psychedelics, and it's unbelievable. It's a real There's thing. Even Netflix shows on it. Yeah. I highly recommend psychedelics in lion's mane for positive benefits. Make sure you have a shaman with you. Make sure you're using it for the positive mindset, because scientists have proven that it does help ADHD, it does help PTSD, addiction, all of that. It has helped, and I'm a huge, from what I've researched, huge fan of it.
Yeah, so those are the types of industries, like I said earlier, that are continuing to be regulated or unregulated. But, like the cannabis space, it was, very black market, gray market type of thing. And, there's compassionate use. But now the states, should be in the U.S. Supreme, and they have the ability to, tax revenue and transact, and the banking and the feds versus all that. So all those different industries, while I started working with Canadian families, I carved out a niche to make sure that those Canadians, because they all want to be able to either get their widget, their consumable down south of the border, and they also want to get paid in U.S. dollars, right?
Oh, most definitely.
Because there's 30% discount up in Canada.
From the exchange.
But yeah, anyway, to digress, in 2008, I kind of said, I got to take a little bit of a breather. And all of a sudden, Lehman, all these banks blowing up. And I'm like, holy shit, I don't even have a resume. I got to get my resume out there, and I ended up taking my securities licenses again because I let them lapse, and I got back into the banking world. But then I found out, because now I'm, have a wide range of relationships, and I've transacted a couple billions of dollars. How do I do what I'm doing, but from a different angle, and continue to help build companies and raise capital, because that's obviously the core of what 100%. We do. But then I found out, oh, shit, I'm giving 30, 40%, 50%, 60% to the house. I'm raising all the money from my relationships. I'm helping structure deals. I'm banging away going, throughout the money centers and going on the road, marketing deals and all this. And I found to myself, you know what, I got to put out my own shingle. Mm-hmm. So I put out Qualified Capital. I thought it was an interesting, says what it is, I'm dealing with qualified capital sources. I ended up letting my licenses lapse, but trying to understand how to compliantly work with companies from the inside out to help them raise money and get them exposure not only in the U.S. but globally, and focusing on that niche market in Canada. Love that. And the last decade, that's been very good to me. What people don't understand about the Canadian capital markets, if I can touch upon it, is a lot of the banks that operate and have offices here in the U.S., they have either headquarters, or they also have their own institutional and banking syndicate in Canada, and they actually accept U.S. persons to open up accounts up in Canada.
Interesting.
So that they can take their stock and deposit it, Like there's a firm and I have a very long-standing relationship with them, a very successful publicly traded bank called Canaccord Genuity. They're out of Boston, out of New York, and they have offices all throughout Canada. I have my friends, my qualified accredited investors, when they're doing a deal with me and I'm trying to do what I would call near-term venture, and I'm not doing the big IPOs that the Morgan Stanleys are doing in the world. I'm understanding how I can have a 15, 20 layer cake, start at the first layer and make sure I can build 7 layers, 10 layers, 20 layers, and then everyone can eat the cake. So in Canada, I can say, Chris, you want to participate, or some of your LPs want to participate in my deal. I'm going to seed the deal, have some capital formation, and then we're going to go to a bank and we're going to say to, like, versus in New York, if I go to the JP Morgans of the world and I say, hey, look, I have this small company, great management team, proven track record, all the bells and whistles that you want to look at, they're going to be like, all right, pay us $100,000 and I'll talk to you in 90 days after we do our due diligence and we get it cleared through compliance. There is a compliance and a due diligence mechanism up in Canada, but the wealth managers up there that are running $100, $200, $700 million, they can walk across the hallway to their compliance officer and say, I like the deal. Brian's a proven operator and a steward of capital, blah, blah, blah. He has all this experience. We like what he's doing. In this case, we've been doing AI for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, for sure.
This is what they're looking to do. But also, they're looking to go public on one of the multiple exchanges up in Canada as a vehicle to then turn around and do a U-turn to the U.S. So that's kind of been, it's not a secret sauce, but it's a niche.
Our friend Eric was telling me about that, that you go into the Canada and then come back to the U.S.
And the biggest thing that let's call it the win-win for everybody in that scenario is the pivotability. We know in not only doing that U-turn, but we know that Silicon Valley and startups, I don't know what the exact number is, don't quote me on it, 80, 90% of them fail.
Oh, yeah.
And where does that capital go? It kind of just poof, evaporates.
Yeah, it's a write-off. They write it off.
Exactly. And so, do those entrepreneurs and founders have a good, learning lesson, and scratch their knee, get back on the bike? Sure. In Canada, if I can guide you and show a roadmap that I'm going to actually get you to a point where, get the company to a point where in the next 6 to 8 months or maybe 90 days, we can actually have a go public transaction, albeit small, maybe a $4 or $5 million IPO after the pre-seed money. And you're looking at market caps that are sub $100 million. And for whatever reason, something happens. We found this in the cannabis space. We were taking greenhouses that were doing traditional farming, converting them to legal licensed greenhouses for cannabis and fully regulated, and obviously a lot of money pouring in. If you're able to get that public and maybe regulation says you can't do this anymore, you actually still have a public vehicle where you can now go out and maybe acquire another asset or pivot into another sector. And so we've been doing a lot of that over the years.
Love that.
And it's kind of been like, cannabis, blockchain was pretty, and people associated blockchain with crypto. And we're like, no, it's separate, different. Right? And I don't think a lot of people understand that.
They don't.
I talk to people about blockchain, and they're like, I'm not investing in Bitcoin. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm talking about blockchain, distributed ledger technology. So we were involved with that for a bit, and then got into other sectors that were sort of emerging. But the core fundamental value is how do I, from my fund days, protect the downside? Because if I take money from you and your investors or whatever as a director, CEO, or capital markets professional inside of a company, and I can't deliver and give you some type of liquidity profile at a certain point in time, you're probably not going to call me back if you lose money with me.
No,
right?
Not at all.
And what I want to be able to do is say, which I've been stuck in probably 6 or 7 deals that have had no liquidity. I've been promised that we're going to go public and we're going to sell the company. And they're actually continuing to raise money. So they're wise investments, but I'd love to have some access to that dry powder to reinvest in times like this when you can build and
I always say, if you're investing into an early stage startup company, when you write that check, don't expect a check back. That's the best expectations that you can have is don't expect anything back. That money's gone. Don't anticipate it back easily in the next 10 years. So when you do get it back, you're going to be excited and happy because you had low expectations. But that is the industry of early stage startup companies. I invested into an early stage startup company out in Vegas. It's payment processing. And thankfully, I had it where it was structured that whenever I called it, it turned into debt and they had to owe it back to me. Beautiful. And that's what I did. It was equity. And then I called it, turned into debt. They owed me back plus a certain interest. And then we called it a day. The company's not anywhere, it's not moving anywhere right now. Yeah. But thankfully I saw that and I said, okay, I'm calling it. I want the debt. Boom, give me my capital back. And thankfully we made that structure. Yeah. We are approaching time. Yeah, sure. So I want to be valuable with your time, but I want to talk about AI. Yes. AI is transitioning everything. Yeah. We had a guy on the podcast early on says there will be $1 billion AI company with just a couple employees because AI is transitioning everything. How are you seeing AI? You've been in it for years. I mean, what, 5, 6, 7 years now? Yeah. How have you seen it evolve, and where do you think it's going to be headed?
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate it because I do want to talk about it because it's all the rage right now.
It's everywhere. I use it on a daily basis.
AI has been around for a long time.
Yeah. And people don't realize that. Yeah. Like, it's been around for decades. Yeah. But it hasn't evolved the way it is now.
Now it's out to the masses, right?
Yeah.
Now everyone's kind of an expert. And what we try to do, like we were talking about last night, is the best thing an entrepreneur can do or a person that's raising capital is to surround themselves with smarter or folks that are very industry specific.
Most definitely.
And that's what we did over the last several years. So I always knew those 2 little letters, didn't believe in it. I was kind of like, it's literally artificial. So it's not real to me. And I'm a very in-person, relationship-based person. And I like the human capital side of things.
When AI first came out to the masses, I remember doing a video or watching a video, and it was of Will Smith eating a pizza, and it was like everywhere. It looked like an alien. And then now I watched an AI video of Biden giving a speech, and I was like, you couldn't tell if it was him or not. Like it was so legit that it's like, wow. And then I'm thinking in my head, how is the dating scene going to be? I mean, we already know, a lot of women use filters now with AI generated stuff. It's like, I'm going to need to see a driver's license. I'm going to need your social security because I got to do a background check now. I need to make sure your credit score is good before we even go on a date. Like, it's wild how AI is transitioning.
Trust and verify.
You're going to have to. I'm going to have an application with everything on it.
So this is the sort of the evolutionizing because when, like I said earlier, I see a lot of fear mongering. I see political influence, regulations definitely coming, and everyone's like, most people are like, well, I'm going to lose my job. First of all, you're not even trying to apply.
If you have that type of mindset, you're going to lose it, and you're meant to lose it because you have that mindset. And there's one thing, and I know we're approaching that time that you touched on last night is manifestation. Totally. So we're going to touch on that, but let's go on with the AI.
Yeah. So 4 or 5 years ago, one of the family offices I advised got into with we do a lot of tech transfer and a lot of our investing. So figuring out who the best academics are. And in this lane, it's all about computational math. It's how the intersection of computational math can be applied using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all these other things into things like our first transaction that my partners were involved in was in weapons detection. Very, very result-driven, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I like to talk about all the benefits that AI will help enhance human capability.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
You have to see it from a different angle. Just like you said, that one person that when you were checking in your hotel may have had a bad day. Yeah. There's one time I was out to dinner, parked in the wrong parking spot, came out, car wasn't there. The people who I was with was like, oh no, your car got towed. I was like, well, I hope it got stolen because I got insurance. I was get me a new car. Oh, yeah. But you have to think it from a different perspective. I was very calm. Then when I went to the tow yard to get my car, the gentleman was so rude, so rude towards me. When I was asking general questions, how do you come up with the tow fee? I'm interested. I want to know your business side of things. Why wouldn't you just ticket me? Things like that. And it was because of the type of car I had. They knew I would pay it. But it's super important before you get into a situation, a discussion, a lawsuit, understand it from their perspective. And I think that's how you can really sharpen your skills to be a phenomenal business leader is understanding it from the other side perspective. Absolutely. Before you make any type of decisions.
Yeah. So we've been successful. I totally agree with you. I think there's going to be a whole cohort of job creation around this.
Oh my God, yeah.
There's so much. My biggest problem at the company that I run now, I'll give a little, plug here.
Yeah.
DiaGen.ai is focused on something that you're extremely passionate about, knowing your podcast and the way you live your life is the healthcare space.
Most definitely.
So last year, when I left my last boardship that I was at, which was in the Web3 space, investing in that space, I said, what am I going to do now, and how am I going to make an impact in this AI space? The particular company we have now that I'm chairman and CEO of, Eric and I seeded back 3.5 years ago.
Oh, nice.
And we brought the best professionals around us. We didn't raise a ton of money, raised $1 million. That company and the management team was able to take that $1 million and do a tremendous amount of work over 2 years. But they ran out of money.
Yeah.
And they were kind of like heading into the red zone, ready to score a couple times. They went through a platform called the Creative Destruction Lab. For those listeners and yourself, if you haven't heard about that, it's kind of like a Y Combinator. And I was just there in Seattle as a reunion sort of alumni to present to investors. Yeah. It went phenomenally.
Good.
But the healthcare space, when you think about AI, people don't understand it. Biology, and you have to ask yourself, and we can maybe take this as a part 2 of our conversation, but there's a reason that big pharma, and nothing against big pharma, they're there. And what we're talking about, like Italy, where
I have everything against big pharma. I can't stand them.
like food and
oh my god, the
process,
food and how it, non-GMO, no lab-grown meat, things like that. And your girlfriend at dinner, she even asked the question, "What's lab-grown meat?"
Yeah,
and that is someone who doesn't understand understand because she's from Canada,
yeah, for sure.
Where I don't think they have that up in there in Canada. It's a lot more healthier, I would assume.
Yeah,
so she was like, well, what is that? And it's like, well, this is America. This is what they're trying to do here. Totally. And I'm sure if you and I went to Italy, they'd be like, what are you guys talking about?
It's a bad rep, but the goal of DiaGen and what we're doing, there's several companies that are out there that are publicly traded that are focused on one thing. How do we now partner with big pharma to use AI and computational math, machine learning and AI to do better drug discovery and build mathematically based on historical data how to build a new peptide or molecule to get closer to cures, rare disease, all this. Why haven't we had any movement in cancer or any of these other things?
My mother has stage 4 breast cancer, and she's been going on 8 years, going very strong, and kudos to her. Yeah. We can find a vaccine for COVID in less than 6 months, but we can't find it for cancer. The reason why is because cancer is the number 1 profit maker for all these big pharma companies.
It's extension of life.
Oh my God, they make so much money. Totally. Yeah, I was telling you last night, $30,000 a month for these chemo pills. Yeah. That's ridiculous. Yeah. That someone has to pay, and it's mainly insurance, $30,000 a month to these big pharma companies. So I think cancer is the number 1 income for all of them. Yeah. And so why would they cut it? Yeah. Why would they come out with a cure?
So they acquire assets, phase 2 assets.
Yeah.
A lot of times they just let them evaporate on the bench. A lot of those data sets and failed phase 2 trials and all this other stuff can actually be analyzed using machines, which are 100 times more capable than humans. But the point is, you still need that human to 100%. Derive at the end of what came out of it.
Yep.
So we're taking, not us as a company, other companies are taking timelines down from 10 years to 7, billions or hundreds of $millions to tens of millions of dollars. But what we're doing is, and what happened during the pandemic, as you mentioned, actually the mRNA vaccines were utilized using AI and computational math, which people don't really think about, but that's why it was so advanced. Now, again, not the best case example because we don't know what the effects of that will be, but what we're trying to do as a company is have a multiple shot on goal play where we're doing diverse geographical partnerships, helping companies that are doing drug discovery, vaccine development, and diagnostics, like we were talking about. I don't know if it was you or someone else, but mammographies. A lot of advancements are happening right now. And for years, people were pushing away because they love the big pharma machine.
Yeah.
Big pharma is now hiring and trying to find the human capital to now compete in that lane because everyone now wants to get to that cure of, ALS, rare disease, cancers. At our company, we are focused on molecule and peptide development. We just signed a deal with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
Oh, congrats.
Which is great. It's part of a genomics consortium. It's an open science thing. Yeah. And so that's great validation for us. tomorrow we're going to cure cancer, but we're going to be able, no,
Yeah.
of course, but we're going to be able to build accurate molecules
to fight against it.
And we're going to do the same things in vaccines and diagnostics.
I love that.
All of this, which I know you're very passionate about, is longevity.
Most definitely.
Precision medicine.
Yep.
Those are the things that we're leaning our company towards. We're taking the company public in a near-term basis, very small valuation, but what we've done and the validation that we've gotten from peers, other public companies, and everything else, we're set up for success because during the pandemic, the Pfizers of the world, their biggest problem was pipeline. If they didn't launch that vaccine, not that we wouldn't have a Pfizer today, but they're hungry for pipeline.
Oh, and they got paid so much money from the government to do so.
Paid so much money, and now you're seeing things like the Ozempics of the world and all these other things. So what we're trying to do is figuring out what gaps need to be filled, understand how we can enhance the existing drug development, vaccine development, and diagnostic development by using AI. Our team, PhD team, computational math team, has the skill set and is already set up, not just using an iteration of ChatGPT or OpenAI, but actually taking a proprietary platform. And as they did in weapons detection, they did some stuff in ESG, they're doing DevOps. We're now, which again, will be regulated, but the government can't stop a company like us trying to save lives.
Yeah, it looked bad.
Cures. And so I want to be able to operate in disrupted industries like this. And so a culmination of kind of what we went over today of 25 plus years has led to me to say, all right, I'm putting my qualified capital business to the side. I've been grinding for 10 months. You know, we are currently raising capital. I'm not trying to solicit capital on this show or anything like that, but we are being very successful in that.
Love that.
We have backing of some of the banks and some of the, sort of sponsors that, particularly in Canada that like to get into this particular sector. And so I've been enjoying it. I even went as far as sitting for a 3-month class at MIT, which again mentioned before. I'm not a a Ivy League guy. And MIT and Harvards of the world have their own issues in terms of sort of what's happened recently. But what made me kind of like quadruple and quintuple down on this sort of deal, deal in this sector is when I was amongst my peers in that course over 3 months, which was not easy. You know, we had to pay some tuition, but at the end of the day, it was like, I'm out of my league. And I was only one or other capital markets professional, but everyone there, because it was very interactive, there's so many existing companies in drug development that are like, we need to get involved with AI.
Oh, unbelievable.
And they want to be able to implement it so that they can compete and be attractive to the large pharmaceutical companies because, of course, they want to be bought.
Correct.
But at the end of the day, just like you and I want to live as long as possible, they want to be able to find things quicker, right, more efficiently to make an impact on patients.
I love that.
So,
I love that. That's phenomenal what you guys are doing there.
Yeah, so, no, I think you and I are very like-minded.
Yeah,
we haven't known each other for, a long time. It was great breaking bread last night.
Oh, most definitely.
I think, some of the things that you're doing, it all comes down, and I'm very grateful to be sitting here because this right here, everything that I've done over the last 25, 30 years has been built on relationships.
Most definitely.
And if we can make money along the way,
let's do it.
That's,
I love it.
Bonus, if you will.
Couple more minutes left. Talk about manifestation. How have you used that to succeed in your life?
Yeah, so I talk about this with my other half. She's a good yin to my yang. And,
she's phenomenal.
And she comes from, a little bit of a different upbringing, but, an entrepreneur in her own right. She owns pharmacies and she's been in the pharmaceutical space. But we had commonality in that she's also a serial entrepreneur that was kind of wedged into this owning of a business. And now she's got 4 or 5 businesses, and she's actually running my qualified capital. Not running, but she's a partner now in that business because I'm not doing it right now. But my nature is every day, because I'm grateful to be sitting here. I've gone through a lot of health issues, and I don't like to use this as a lever, but I've been sober for 5.5 years.
Congrats.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's not an easy task either. But
it is not.
For every morning I wake up, and some mornings are a struggle because
It feels better. I like last night. I don't drink alcohol.
Yeah.
I drank water with lemon. Normally I drink sparkling water. I just don't care to drink.
It's changed my life for sure.
And you feel better. I look better. Like I don't care to go out.
I need to work on the look better side.
You look good.
No, but at the end of the day, it's more about like, you know, I'm not saying about addiction, but you know, when I like something, that's why I haven't drank coffee yet, and you know, some of these things, weird things, quirky things that I have. But to the manifestation side of things, it's like, you know, I look at, you know, I'm very observant, and I don't mention this earlier, but I just did a 6-7, almost a 2-month cross-country trip back.
You mentioned it last night.
Back to West Coast and coming back.
Unbelievable.
But I got a really good sampling of different areas in the country.
Yeah.
And noticing people. And one thing I'll tell you is I'm very fortunate to be in the place that I am. I think I have a lot of aspirations. I don't think I'll ever, like we were talking about, because we're entrepreneurs and we want to be able to make impact, you know, we'll probably never retire, right? In a way, you know, but from a manifestation standpoint, I am super optimistic, sometimes too optimistic as a fault, but I think your mindset and the ability to, and part of my quote sobriety is, you know, helping other people. There's going to be capital rewards through that process. And I think if, you know, you build the right relationships, and you have to test those relationships, because
100%.
I've been done dirty by, you know, not only personal relationships, but business relationships. 100%. You learn from all those different things. I think, you know, like I said, you know, every day meeting someone or figuring out how to do diligence on a deal, super important. You have to go through the next level, and then make sure that you can take those particular components and turn it into something.
No,
right?
Most definitely.
Just like, again, analogies like social media.
Yeah.
It's got to be a two-way conversation, because if you're just out there doing stuff, you want to make sure that you're getting impact and a return on that. Most
definitely. It's expensive, time, everything.
I mean, what you're doing is fantastic. Thanks. It's I'm not saying it's courage, but like, you know, everyone wants to not be a JRE or something like that, but the lanes and the things that you're attacking, you know, in terms of real estate, health, all the topics that you cover, and the variety of folks that you see. Obviously, I'm grateful to be on the show. I appreciate that. But, you know, you have to have that mindset in order to create your own wealth. Most definitely. And create your own relationships and actually follow through.
Oh,
a lot
of people
don't follow through.
No, the biggest thing is taking action. And I know we're up on time. We can talk for days. Yeah, sure. You know, but the biggest thing to finish this is you have to take action. Totally. You know, don't be scared. Don't be afraid. Go out there and do it. Yeah. Brian, thanks so much for joining us. Wealth 100%. Of knowledge in the space. Thanks so much for coming to Charlotte. It was fun.
I'll be back. I'm headed back to Miami. But
when you come back, let me know. We'll do another 2 hours of this.
No doubt.
But, you know, it was really enjoying last night, having dinner with you.
Yes.
Your wonderful girlfriend, business partner. Really enjoyed that. Thanks so much for joining us.
Cheers. Thanks again.
Yeah.
See you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to the Chris Salerno Show. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and gained valuable insight to help you along your journey. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. If you have any questions or topics that you would like to cover, feel free to reach out directly to me. Shoot me a message on Instagram at Chris_Salerno_. Until next time, keep pushing forward and stay inspired.